Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest casualty of Brexit, and it's a big one. Nearly 3,000 jobs to be lost from Port Talbot as the steelworks closes its blast furnace down years before the transition to the arc furnace. The Tories invested hundreds of millions of our money into this, hailing it as saving jobs at Port Talbot just a few months ago. Now look, and when you consider what's happening with so far the full support of Rishi Sunak, you begin to see how the Conservatives continue to weaken the UK to the benefit of their real friends and benefactors. In this case, it would be a great outcome for India. Yet again, Brexit has foreign markets laughing at us. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So Tata Steel have announced nearly 3,000 job losses at Port Talbot in Wales. The Tories in Westminster were reported to be refusing to take calls from Welsh ministers when the news was announced. This is how little the Conservatives care. Now, before I get onto the chronology of what's happened here, as the Brexiteers try to claim that this is net zero, but is in actual fact their Brexit, let's look at the human impact. Port Talbot is quite a small town. It's got a population of not much more than 35,000. The loss of like 3,000 jobs, albeit not all of those jobs will be people living in Port Talbot, but they'd still be working and spending in Port Talbot. That would badly hurt a town double that size. And think about the impact on the wider community. So 2.8 thousand fewer pay packets means lots of families, and I mean lots of families, suddenly having to cut back. That's bad for those families, but it also means less money being spent on goods and services locally. So those businesses have to cut back as well. Some small businesses may go under entirely. Either way, if people are spending less locally, and this is a lot less locally, then other local businesses have to cut back as well. That means more job loss, and that means even less being spent in the local economy. It's the sort of domino effect we saw in the 80s under Thatcher, which turned once thriving industrial towns into ghost towns, as the Specials once put it. So what's led to this? Well, before Brexit, people warned that leaving the single market in particular would make things more difficult to export, and industries already struggling for competitiveness would be thrown to the wolves. Steel has for a long time in the UK faced stiff competition from cheaper imports from China and India in particular. You know, what's left of our steel industry has had to focus on higher quality steel products. But it's vital that we are able to produce our own steel products as a matter of national security. Only a traitor to the country would put us in a position where we are reliant upon imports for something like steel, especially with countries where we don't always see eye to eye. It massively weakens our international clout if there are some countries we cannot challenge on issues because we're dependent upon them for trade. We then become a vassal state. Back in 2021, the year we left the single market, the steel industry warned that the government's decision not to maintain EU protections for the industry would lead them vulnerable to cheap imports. The Tories didn't care. Whether they were more interested in ingratiating themselves with India for their precious trade deal, or whether it was completely unrelated and just part of their core belief that destroying trade barriers against imports would persuade the world to do likewise for us, I cannot say. The bottom line is that the steel industry warned the government exactly what would happen, and it has now happened. But before we catch up with the present day, there's another bit of history to consider. In September, the government announced a £500 million public investment into Port Talbot for the arc furnace steel production. Now, Labour are also in favour of this as a way of decarbonising, but Labour's plan has been transition, that their green investment creates jobs and that those jobs replace the high carbon jobs as and when they come online. It's not an overnight thing. It's not get rid of the high carbon stuff and then we'll wait until the low carbon jobs are ready. No, it's a transition. What's happened here is that the jobs related to the blast furnace production have been lost now, long before the arc furnace will be ready. In a nutshell, Tata Steel have said they cannot produce steel competitively with their blast furnace. Last September, Sunak and Badenoch were hailing the fact that their £500 million of taxpayer investment was securing jobs. In reality, they spent £500 million on destroying a town in Wales. The Brexiteers are out in force blaming net zero. This is a nonsense. Net zero is a target for 2050. The idea with net zero is to carry on using the blast furnaces until the arc furnaces are in operation and then transition those jobs. Now, before people talk about blast and arc furnaces in the comments, I know they don't do the same thing or work in the same way. I'm a physicist who's taught steel making in a steel town, but I'm focused purely on the politics for this video. The point is that net zero has no bearing on this decision because net zero says you use the blast furnace until you're ready to transition. As long as this has all happened by 2050, you meet the net zero targets. That is what it's about. It's about hitting the target for 2050. It doesn't take 26 years to build an arc furnace. So net zero is in no way responsible for this tragedy. It is down to business finances. The reason think about it just empirically. Tata Steel have a blast furnace, can produce steel, right? Why would they close that down, losing profit? Oh, it can only be because they're not making a profit. It's really that simple. And why are they not? Because the Brexiteers kept moaning, oh, the EU is this very protectionist area. It's a very protectionist market. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And who does it protect? The businesses inside that market. We have dropped those EU era protections for our own steel industry because we have a government run by people with that ideology of completely free trade. Because they're led by these free market idealists who are completely unconnected to the way the world works in reality. Tata Steel has decided the business model is no longer valid and it's closing the blast furnace early. These job losses are because of Brexit and Brexit mentality. Even when we were in the EU, the Conservative government tried to water down EU protections. So it's not just that they refused to carry on adopting them afterwards. EU protections always struggled with, because whenever we had a Conservative government, it's like, well, we don't like these protections. We want to let India and China and Russia over our own manufacturing. Because that's what it did. At the time, it was helping China over British steelmakers. You know, the Tories are not batting for the UK, arguably never have done. Although I would also argue they've never been so blatant at acting against the interests of our country for the benefit of other countries before. And this is beyond mere incompetence or short-sightedness. There are some people who think there might be a nefarious angle as well, because this decision means that the UK will not be producing as much steel. I've seen the suggestion that it might therefore be a deliberate ploy to make it harder for Labour to implement their industrial strategy. Another case of the Tories realising that they're going to lose the election, because they know they're going to lose the election now. Salting the earth for Labour. Only, this isn't about harming a political party. What it's doing is harming the entire country and its future. Now, I don't know if that is their thinking. You could argue it fits, but the results of yesterday's news can also be easily put down to just their ideology, Brexit ideology, and a disdain for doing anything in government. Let the market decide. That is their motto. However, the problem with having a government that believes let the market decide is what happens when the market decides that Britain is no longer worth investing in. Because the data is really clear. The market decided that the minute the Brexit referendum result was announced. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.